Hello everyone, it's Smite Chess and we're going to look at another Leela Stockfish game in the CCC11 finals. Again, it's 30 minutes on the clock each with 5-second increment. In this game Leela was white and Stockfish was black. And the opening was d4, knight to f6, c4 and then g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop e2, and castles, bishop e3 and then knight c6. Followed by knight to f3 and then e5 from black, followed by d5, knight to e7 and then knight to d2. And this is the end of the opening book. And we're into a King's Indian classical variation, and I believe this is called the Petrosian system. So basically in this position both sides are going to try and attack. White will probably attack on the queen side, black's going to try and attack on the king side. In the game Stockfish now played knight to e8. This makes sense because after Leela plays f3, black hits in with f5 and launches a pawn storm on this side of the board. Typically here white should usually play, well, you usually play c5 followed by f4, bishop f2 and then g5. These are the main moves, and then white follows in with knight to c4, knight to g6 from black, b4 to support the c pawn and then rook to f7, takes on d6 twice and knight to b5, knight to h4, with a very double-edged position, and this is typically what human players play, and this is the most notorious position in this opening. But in the game Leela actually played a very unique and unusual move. She played queen to b3 instead, keeping an eye on this b7 pawn, stunting black's development, stopping the bishop from moving from c8 at this particular moment. Stockfish struck in the centre with c5 and try and blockade the centre. Now, white could go en passant here, but I think it would be really bad for white to do this because then the knight would just get into d4. Because let's say we're en passant here, then knight takes c6, and maybe this d5, d4 square, sorry, looks really nice for black. However, maybe white could have gone in for this because there's also ideas of a discovered attack for white, maybe even castle queenside. And this d6 pawn looks rather weak actually. Maybe white should have gone in for this. After c5 though, Leela decided to play g4 instead. Ganging up on this f5 square, I don't think black wants to take this pawn on g4. Instead Stockfish has played bishop f6 and Leela continued with g5. The bishop retreats and then h4 is played to support the g5 pawn. We get a very blockaded position now. After knight g7, Leela throws in a4, knight to h5 from black and a5 from Leela. So Leela's just advancing her pawns. Try and make use of her dynamic knights on the queen side. Knight to f4 was played by Stockfish, and in this position Leela played rook h2. Bishop takes f4 was a possibility, and after e takes f4, white could probably play h5. It looks very interesting, but actually after rook f7, takes, rook h2, rook h7 and takes twice, followed by a move like bishop d3. This is actually considered dead equal for both sides. So for this reason, Leela decided to play rook h2 instead. So clearly Leela is playing for some sort of advantage out of this game. Stockfish continued with bishop to d7 and Leela took the pawn on b7. So this was a potential sacrifice by black. In the game Stockfish actually continued with rook f7, but I was thinking maybe rook to b8 was interesting. But I think white gains a big advantage. After queen takes a7, rook takes b2. Bishop f1 and then f takes e4 followed by f takes e4. White gains an advantage because they're a pawn up now. After rook f7 there's rook b1. If they take twice and then play knight c8, eventually we end up in this position. Queen takes a5 has just been played, but then just rook a2. So Leela's given back the pawn but now has a nice advantage. If queen to b4, this takes twice, knight to d1, bishop g7, knight to f2 and h6. And this is now considered a big advantage for white. Now my Stockfish actually gives this like a +3 for white. And I think the reason why is because this pawn is easily taken in a few moves, and white's just going to advance with moves like c5, and it's very easy to play for white. Black's got a bit of issues because this g5 pawn is really awkward for black, and this bishop on g7 is terrible. It's going to be very hard for black to develop this. So maybe after queen takes b7, this is why Stockfish played rook to f7. And Leela just continued with queen a6, hitting the d6 pawn. Bishop c8 defends and attacks at the same time, but Leela slowly retreats the queen back into safety after bishop d7, queen b3, rook b8, and queen to a3. The queen is once again safe, and white's just won a free pawn. However, black does have some compensation with the open B file. Stockfish continued with bishop g7. Leela played an unusual move, castle queenside. So sort of gets the king into the game and away from any attack from black. Just away from this knight from f4. Stockfish played knight to c8, king c2 was played, bishop e8, rook b1. So Stockfish is just clearing the lines for the rook to move to b7, and Leela hits out with a6. Stockfish moves their rook, and Leela plays knight to a2. So Leela's potentially preparing a move like b4 here. I was thinking after queen c7 is played, b4 now would probably look good, but Stockfish actually has a really nice move, just rook to b5, keeping everything together. The point is, if c takes b5, then c takes b4 can be played with check, and black's going to win some material, especially that queen on a3. If you just go back as well to this position, b takes c5 doesn't work either because rook a5 is really nice, and if the queen ever moves away, rook takes a2 will be played, and if white decides to try and take the rook, then queen takes a5, rook takes b8 and queen takes a2. After king to d1, black can play queen to a1 with check, and now the bishop is coming into a4, and white will have a very nice advantage. So unfortunately b4 doesn't work because of rook b5, and black starts getting into the game. So for this reason, Leela just dropped the bishop back to f1. Stockfish now played h5. Leela just ignores this and plays king to d1. She's happy to blockade the king side up because all the play is going down the queen side anyway. Stockfish tries to open some lines up with f takes e4, but after f takes e4, rook to a8, it's very difficult for black to really do anything now. And white sort of has a big vice and grip on the position. For instance, after rook f2 attacking the knight, rook b to b8 is played. Now it was actually possible for Leela to take this knight off with bishop takes f4, e takes f4, and bishop h3. This is perfectly nice for white, so Leela could have got in for this. If black defends the pawn, then white can just continue rook knight to c1, bishop d7, takes, and king c2. After a few more moves, let's say knight d3, takes on h4, knight to f3, attacking the queen. Queen h3, white gets a superior position after a trade of queens and a rook. After knight to b6, rook takes f4. This is a definite advantage and winning endgame for white. So bishop takes f4 was certainly possible for Leela, but she didn't want to go in for it. She just played king c2, so maybe she thinks she has a bigger advantage by playing this move. Play continued, bishop d7, rook f3, and then knight to b6. Leela continued knight to c3, and it's fair to say white does have a really big advantage and hold on this position now. Black can't really do anything except sit back and wait for white to do something. And here Leela certainly does something. She plays b4, hitting out at this c pawn. So black is forced to take this, c takes b4, rook takes b4, and Stockfish plays bishop to g4. Leela sidesteps the bishop, bishop f8 is played, bishop f2, king h8, and there's just a lot of manoeuvring, rook e3 and queen c5, rook to b3. Leela offers the trade of queens, Stockfish refuses, but then just knight to b5. So Leela is protecting the c pawn twice with their knight and bishop, and now the queen and knight are attacking this d6 pawn. Knight d7 is played, and I think this is a bit of a trap that Stockfish is setting. I think it's trying to entice Leela to take this d6 pawn. It looks a bit risky though. I think you'd all agree if you were playing this in a blitz game you probably wouldn't take it. It's too double-edged. If knight takes d6, then play can continue queen c7. Rook b7 is given as the best move, but then Stockfish actually just wins a knight. And after a few trades, we get this position where rook takes a7 is played, bishop c5, takes, rook takes a8, rook takes a8, rook to b5. So Stockfish is actually a piece up, but Leela has 3 pawns for the piece. After knight takes a6 though and c5, it's very double-edged. Knight to c7, but eventually after a few more moves we get it gets clearer. So c6 is played, but then black can just fold if they want and play knight takes d5, e takes, rook takes, and now we've got a very equal position, and we'll probably end in a drawn game. So sure, Leela could have taken this d6 pawn, but it's very risky to do so. I wouldn't really take this pawn if I was in this type of game, I'll be honest. I would prefer to play it safe. Leela played it safe as well with rook e1. Black played knight c5, captured is played, bishop takes c5, d takes c5, and I like white's position now, just queen a1, hitting the c5 pawn, bishop g7 to defend, and now knight to d6 attacking the queen. And now Leela just manoeuvres her pieces around to get into the ideal setup. So black has a few ideas here. So they play bishop d7 preparing bishop a4, but then Leela just plays rook a1, rook to c8, and now there is a lot of manoeuvring, I'll be honest. So after Leela's just trying to get the optimal position, attacking pawns, poking and prodding. So attacking these weak c5 and e5 pawns, and Stockfish just continues to defend both. But Leela slowly encroaches with the knights. So here we get knight to d6. The rook moves to c7, and again poking and prodding from white. And after several more pokes and prods, rook f2, queen g7, queen a5. We're getting to this position where eventually Stockfish does make a mistake. So after several more moves, a few more backward and forwards, the bishop defends the pawn on e5, there's queen e3, attacking the c5 pawn twice, bishop f8 to defend it. The queen goes back, and now the rook defends the e-pawn. Bishop d3, and now there's a bit of a mistake from Stockfish. They played bishop to g7 to defend the e5 pawn again, but now this leaves the c5 pawn wide open to be taken by the knight. If we just go back, queen g7 could have been played, but again white is now infiltrating. They could play bishop c2. If rook to c8, there's bishop a4, bishop d7. And these are Stockfish moves, queen a5, king h7, knight to d6. So Stockfish is a bit more direct, let's say. And after a few more moves, definitely white has the advantage now. So Stockfish should have gone in for that sort of position, but eventually bishop g7 was played, and Leela just snatches a pawn, knight takes c5, the queen goes to c8, knight jumps in, and this is pretty much game over now, to be honest. Leela's 2 pawns up. All she really needs to do is just push these pawns up. Even d6 here will probably win. So after a few more moves, I don't want to go into too much detail now because it's pretty much game over. So bishop takes c8, knight takes c8, and there's a trade of pieces. This suits white perfectly. And it's a bit ridiculous actually because Leela could win so much faster, but she prefers to get into these really long endgames. So I'm just going to speed through now because there's 170 moves and we're only up to move like 100. But yeah, this is an easy win for white, and for some reason I'll just go through the game really fast because it's a bit stupid. Yeah, for some reason again Leela just likes to trade off all the pieces and try and do a king and rook checkmate at the end. So eventually, after a few more moves, Leela chases the bishop around the board for quite a while. After a few more moves, we get into this position, rook and king checkmate, and Leela mates Stockfish very nicely. So that was a bit ridiculous, I'll be honest. I feel like there was like 70 wasted moves there, but nonetheless, Leela pretty much dominated that game from start to finish. Stockfish sacrificed the b7 pawn as we saw, and Leela was just a nice solid pawn up throughout the game, and there was not really much Stockfish could have done. The position was blocked. It's not usually how you play the King's Indian. Black should probably be attacking more. And to be honest, that opening probably suited Leela down to the ground. But anyway, let me know your thoughts. I don't usually play the King's Indian, so I'm not an expert. So maybe one of you guys is and has some feedback on that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Drop a like, comment and subscribe if you did. And I'll see you in the next video for 2 more Leela and Stockfish matches.